Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Colvin, and I'm pleased to welcome into studio local author Chip Bishop. Chip, welcome. Thank you so much for coming in and talking with us.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for the opportunity.
So you are a local author. I've written a couple of books now. Your new book is called Quentin and Flora, a Roosevelt and Vanderbilt in Love During the Great War. And for me, that title just tells me that I want to pick this book up and read it. So talk to me a little bit about, what motivated you to want to write this book?
Well, when I was writing the first book, The Lion and the Journalist, I was struck by a period during that book when President Roosevelt is profoundly affected by the loss of his beloved son, Quentin. He was his fifth child with Edith, and he had great plans for Quentin. He saw him as his political heir. He had all the makings of a political success story. He was good looking, he was charming, he was a writer, he was a poet, he was a very attractive young man. And Theodore really thought that he could be his successor. And when he lost him, it was profound, and it led to his death within 6 months. So I felt I needed to dig deeper into that story and find out more about it. And then my agent at the time suggested, well, you can't tell just Quentin's story. You have to tell the story of Flora, who was his secret fiancée.
And so I'm sure that to you said, well, who's Flora? I need to know a little bit more about her. And already the story sounds so fascinating. Tell me a little bit about, how you got to find out about them and where their story came from.
Well, Flora was the great-granddaughter of Cornelius Vanderbilt, the great railroad magnate of the 19th century. And I had the opportunity to meet twice with Flora's daughter, who is 86 years old and living in Connecticut. She was very supportive, provided me with some interesting letters and photographs, but the bulk of the material I found in letters that Quentin and Flora had written to each other during the beginning of World War I and in the years preceding that, when Quentin was at Harvard. And I have the letters going both ways. They've been preserved by the family. Now they're at Harvard, and they form the basis of the story.
And that's really, I think, where you get the real story between people. I think that when people write letters, they don't write them intending to share them with the world. It's a communication between one person and another. So you must have learned so much, not only about Quentin and Flora individually, but also their connection to one another.
Absolutely. That opened the door to all kinds of stories, all kinds of angles. I have to say, at times I felt that I was invading their privacy a little bit, because these were love letters and more that they had written to each other 100 years ago. But I felt that if I could use excerpts from those letters which illustrated the story and the nature of their relationship, I would be okay.
Why did they have to keep their relationship under wraps? Why was it a secret?
Well, they were members of two very powerful and influential families in the early part of the 20th century. He, of course, was the son of President Roosevelt. She was descended from the Vanderbilts and the Whitneys. These families were not exactly on the same page. The Vanderbilts and the Whitneys were very wealthy people. They had, in Roosevelt's opinion, exploited the masses in ways that he was not supportive of. So there was a built-in hostility between these two families to begin with. And neither one at the beginning wanted the other person in the family. So that was problem number one. Problem number two was they were both 19 years old, which 100 years ago was even more tender than it is today. So they felt that they had to keep their engagement secret for a while.
So, and again, just coming out through all these letters. So what happened as their relationship developed? Obviously, was met with tragedy at the end. But can without giving all of the secrets of the book away, talk to me a little bit more about how their relationship developed.
Well, I begin the story with each of them in their childhood, and they grew up in very different ways. Flora in the mansions of Fifth Avenue in New York City, the Breakers in Newport, and several other mansions. The family had a few of them. Quentin grew up in the White House. He was living there during his father's presidency from age 4 to about age 12. And some of the best stories in the book, the hilarious tales, occur when Quentin and the White House gang rampage through the White House, refighting the battles of the Spanish-American War with their swords, and challenging their father to play bear with them, and to wrestle, and to play hide and seek in the White House attic. And all of these stories come through, while Flora is growing up amid riches and splendor with her family in New York and Newport and elsewhere.
Indeed. So talk to me a little bit. Obviously, you know, you said a lot of research was done to get the story to come out. How much research did you do? How far did you have to travel to get the story?
Well, it took about 1.5 years to get the material I felt that I needed. Fortunately for me, most of the letters are on file at Harvard. So I can't tell you how many trips on the P&B bus I made up to Harvard and spent the day researching the letters, and then came back at night and transcribed the excerpts that I thought I needed. One of the most amazing stories in the research end of this came when Flora's daughter told me about the discovery of the letters that her mother had received from Quentin. They were actually discovered in a shoebox underneath Flora's bed after she died, and she lived to be 88 years old, I believe. And we wouldn't have those letters today if Flora hadn't preserved them. Her daughter told me that toward the end of her life, Flora had pretty much forgotten her relationship with Quentin. It lasted about 2.5 years, and it was 60 years ago at that time. But the letters tell us the story.
They do. They do indeed. So really looking forward to reading this book, Chip. You know, what did you learn going through the process? I mean, so much, I'm sure, about the story. Is this a story that has been told before? Is this a new story that is going to be new to all readers? It
is a new story. I mean, the story of Quentin's service during the war and what happened is, you know, generally pretty well known. But the untold story here is this relationship and how these two young people connected and loved each other very deeply, tried desperately to be married before something happened to Quentin, as they wrote over and over again. That was a struggle, a titanic struggle that even Theodore Roosevelt could not resolve. I think what I learned more than anything else was how deeply and profoundly the loss of Quentin affected President Roosevelt. He died 6 months after Quentin died, of physical causes to be sure, but really from a broken heart. And I think that's the tragedy part of the story. There's plenty to laugh at. There's some to cry at. And I admit that I got a little teary-eyed myself at times as I found these letters and read the full story. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to share a little bit of the book, to give our viewers a preview of that. And this excerpt, from what I understand, has ties to us here on Cape Cod. Yes, it is a short excerpt from the book when Theodore Roosevelt and Quentin come to Cape Cod. And I'll read an excerpt here from a chapter called 7 Bad Pennies. Quentin enjoyed most of the perks of being a presidential child, including the opportunity to travel with his father's entourage from time to time and to experience the attendant pomp and circumstance. Quote, almost with the dawn of the morning sun, Provincetown was astir and out to watch for the presidential yacht Mayflower with the president on board, a local newspaper reported on August 20th, 1907. And there she was. It was just 9 o'clock when a little tinge of black smoke far off on the horizon proclaimed her coming. It was a glorious sight, said the newspaper. Quentin surely watched in awe from the deck of the Mayflower as it passed through a ceremonial lane in Provincetown Harbor, flanked by no less than 8 battleships, decked out with colorful flags, raised in tribute to the commander-in-chief. As a 21-gun salute boomed, the President, First Lady, daughter Ethel, and Quentin walked the pier and boarded open carriages for the ride through town. They drove past 1,500 Marines standing at attention to the top of Town Hill, where TR would preside at the groundbreaking for a tower marking the Pilgrims' first landing in America. There were cheers aplenty for the popular president and more than a few shout-outs for Quentin. At 9, going on 10, he had achieved a celebrity status of his own, even on the remote outer tip of Cape Cod.
At the young age of 9 or 10.
At the young age of 9 or 10. His antics growing up in the White House were covered extensively by the newspapers of the era. And he would become the most popular child celebrity in America until Shirley Temple came along in the 30s.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So where can people get a copy of this book if they would like to read it? I know you're going to be kind of going on the circuit both here on Cape Cod as well, doing some signings and some readings, but if people would like to get their hands on a copy, what's the best way for them
Well,
to do
it's
so?
available at local bookstores, specifically at Books by the Sea in Osterville, at Titcomb's in Sandwich, and Market Street Bookshop in Mashpee. You can also order it online through Amazon.com in both the print and the Kindle versions. So it's everywhere.
It is. And would you say you have to be a history buff to want to read this book, or is this really a book for everyone?
Not so much. I think my first book was more targeted at people who love history and presidential stories. This is essentially a love story set against the backdrop of World War I. And we'll actually be coming upon the 100th anniversary of World War I in August. So it's very timely for those of us who don't know a lot about World War I. Many of us don't. We know World War II, and we certainly know Vietnam and the wars that followed, but for some reason in our school days, we never seem to have time to understand World War I, and this will bring that into focus as well.
Wonderful. So any thoughts on what your next book might be?
I'm actually soliciting ideas.
Okay.
I was approached by the National Park Service a couple of weeks ago to write a biography of Quentin's older sister, Ethel Roosevelt. One has never been done on her. And she has an interesting story to tell. She befriended Quentin at critical moments in his life, and I'm thinking about that, but if your viewers have any ideas, I'm all ears.
Great. Well, Chip, I thank you so much for joining us today. I can't wait to read the book, and we thank you so much again.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Chip Bishop, of course, author of Quentin and Flora. You can learn more about it at quentinandflora.com. For Barnstable This Morning, I'm Sarah Colvin.